Welcome to episode 181 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Rebecca Branstetter about things you never knew about the special ed referral process and what your school psychologist actually does all day. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript or find our new Truth for Teachers podcast community on Facebook. You can share your thoughts on the show there and reflect with other listeners in our private group. This episode is sponsored by ViewSonic Education. They're the creator of ViewBoard, an interactive whiteboard for the classroom, and My ViewBoard, which is a digital whiteboarding app. Together, they help teachers create engaging lessons and present them. Search the internet, open your favorite apps, and play educational videos, all from your digital whiteboard. Finally, a solution that teaches the way that you do. To learn more, visit viewsonic.com/education. My guest today is basically the school psychologist version of me. That is pretty much the simplest way to put it. Dr. Rebecca Branstetter and I met about 12 years ago when we were both new to education blogging. We just connected right away, and it has been amazing how our life paths have paralleled in so many different ways. She's now the author of School Psychologist Survival Guide and several books on parenting kids with special needs, such as The Parent's Guide to Executive Functioning and The Conscious Parent's Guide to ADHD. Her expertise in supporting students with disabilities has been featured in tons of media outlets like NPR, Huffington Post, the Greater Good Science Center, and she speaks across the country on topics of educator well-being and supporting school psychologists so that they can be champions for learning and mental health. What's really cool about Rebecca's work is that she's also the founder of the Thriving School Psychologists Collective. It's an online course and community that's sort of like my 40-hour teacher workweek club, only she's helping school psychologists streamline their workflow and focus on what matters most. So I asked Rebecca to come on the show because anytime we get a chance to hang out and talk is a good time, frankly. And she's in the Bay Area in California. So me being in Brooklyn, we rarely see each other. So I'll take a phone call if that's what I can get from her because she's amazing. But also because she is a wealth of information for teachers about supporting kids with special needs. She is going to give you the inside scoop on what school psychologists do and how they can make your job as a teacher easier. Listen in. So, Rebecca, I can't say that I actually know that much about what a school psychologist actually does. When I was teaching, we had to share a school psych with like 5 other schools. So I never really saw ours unless it was in an IEP meeting. So I'm wondering if you can start by telling me exactly what the role of a school psych is supposed to be and what they actually do from day to day.
Yes, of course. So, one of the things that's so interesting about that question is there's actually 2 parts in it. One is what should it be? And then what is it? Right. And so I want to talk a little bit about school psychologists as a profession. So the recommended ratio of school psychologists to student population is 1 to 700. So like an elementary school of 700 would be the recommended ratio for us to have the most impact. And the reality is that it's more like 1 to 1,400. And in some communities, particularly in rural ones, it's like 1 to 3,000. So you can imagine whatever your classroom size is, teachers out there, double that. Okay, now triple that. And then you would definitely have a different day-to-day experience, right? So what it's supposed to be is to be working at all 3 tiers of intervention. When I say tiers, I mean universal prevention strategies, intervention strategies for some kids who are struggling academically, emotionally, or behaviorally, and then at a top tier, working intensively with students who don't profit from those interventions, right? Sort of an RTI kind of model, response to intervention. The reality is that with high caseloads, we end up being worked only at that top tier, which is assessment for special education services. There's other things at that top tier, but normally the school psychologist role is in high caseload environments like the one you've described. We're ending up being gatekeepers to special education, and our only role is testing. And so it's test, IEP meeting, repeat. And what's so frustrating for school psychs across the country is we're trained to do so much more. We're trained to do, working with school-wide social emotional learning initiatives, behavior support, where you can do consultation in the classroom. We can do small groups. We can do counseling. We can do consultation and parent ed. And when we're overburdened, we end up doing just special education assessments. So what happens is that a pervasive myth is that we are only special education gatekeepers. Our only role is testing.
Let's dive into that a little bit more, this process for getting kids identified for special ed services. I will admit that this was also a mystery to me as a teacher. I only knew what my role was, and then it felt basically like a waiting game for months and months on end with just some periodic meetings in there. And I really felt like I had no idea what was going on in the process. So, can you give us a behind the scenes look at getting kids identified for services?
Yeah, so this is something that comes up all the time is that school psychologists don't feel like often that teachers and parents and the school community really understand what the amount of complexity and work goes on behind the scenes from I feel like this child has a challenge all the way to the IEP meeting. And we can totally appreciate the frustration of a teacher who maybe if that student particularly is acting out behaviorally, and is really having a challenge in the class, that there's a waiting game. And then, adding to the frustration is that sometimes you can wait months and months on end. You have the meeting and the student doesn't qualify, right?
Hmm.
So you kind of felt like you were just like holding on for something that, trying to get them extra support that never happened. So here's kind of, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of a second myth that school psychologists, when I polled them, identified that special education testing is kind of like a blood test, right? Like you go in, you get tested, and you're done, right? That would be great, but there is no blood test for learning disabilities or ADHD or emotional disabilities at this time. What it really involves is a whole lot of pre-testing legwork and consultation and post-testing analysis. So I'm just going to talk about what is involved from start to finish, including all that front end and back end work. And then I want to ask you, kind of a fun question about what you'd estimate how many clock hours you think it would take for a special education evaluation. So I'm going to
Okay.
put you on the spot real quick. I'm going to have you guesstimate first, and then I'm going to tell you what's involved, and I'll tell you what my school psychologist said it takes. So go ahead, spit it out. What do you think?
I'm going to say 10 hours, maybe 15, depending on the student.
Okay, yes, it does vary by the complexity of the question. All right, so now I'll tell you all the stuff that goes into it. And I have to
Okay.
tell you also that school psychologists are under some of the same system-wide challenges teachers are, in which there are laws and rules and procedures that we know don't serve students well all the time, but we are still bound by them, and yet we have no power to change them. So this is an important consideration in special education, that there is actually a lot of legal and ethical considerations in the special education evaluation. So it's not just I'm going to look at this student's intelligence and that's the main question. The real main question for school psychologists is twofold. One is, does the student have a disability, as very specifically defined in the law? And then number two is that disability so severe that there's no way that kid's needs can be met in general education? Okay. So in that process, we do many things. First, a lot of times an unseen work thing that we're doing is to get the parents' buy-in for an assessment, right? So, maybe the school has identified a challenge, but the parent is not on board. So we do a lot of education with parents in pre-referral meetings of this is what it would be like, and educate them on special education and get them comfortable with the process and comfortable with us and trusting that this is something that they want to sign on to. So there's a little bit of legwork there. Often there's pre-referral meetings, which sometimes in this neck of the woods in California, we call them SST meetings, but they're called various things across the country. But it's where you meet and problem solve with a team, with the parent usually, about what it is that the child's presenting a challenge with. And so there's those meetings, including the scheduling around that and consulting with parents and teachers about what's been done already and taking data on what interventions have been tried, looking at the cumulative folder, looking at attendance, looking at English language proficiency, looking at what interventions have been done before, right? And so all of that, I've never seen the student yet, by the way. At this point, we get the permission to assess, which requires a little bit of paperwork. Special education, honestly, is like the Department of Redundancy department when it comes to paperwork. I tell you, like I fill out the same form 62 times. So we go through that process. We finally have permission to test. We go into your classroom. You may have seen your school psychologist lurking in the back of the class, whatever. She's looking to see that child in context. And here's a quick commercial for why the rating scales that we give you, those super long ones. Do you know what I'm talking about, Angela?
Yes.
Where you're like, why is there 180 questions that ask the same thing, right? The reason we do that is because we're going to be working with a kid one-on-one, and kids present so differently in the one-on-one than they do in the classroom context, right? And also just by Murphy's Law, the day I come in to observe a kid in your class is the best day of their lives. Have you ever, I don't get to see the behavior that the teachers see. They're on task. They're raising their hand. Like this, like something about like them, like my presence in the classroom. I'm not doing anything, but so it's a sample, right? And in order to get the, that's like a snapshot, but we need to get the scrapbook. And that's where the teacher feedback is so important, is because you all have the scrapbook. What are they like on the daily? Because they're different in math than they are in language arts and then they are in recess. So that's a commercial for please fill out our surveys, because your feedback is so important for us seeing the big picture. Okay, by the way, I haven't seen the child yet. We're still working on that. So then I try to schedule around, PE is the class they like and they don't want to come, or there's a field trip, or the kid's absent, or these things, right? So I get to work with a student, and usually it's about a 4 to 6 hours of like one-on-one testing, hovering around 4, depending on the age of the student and the level of cooperation, right? They may have to do multiple sessions with kids with attention challenges or behavioral challenges, right? Okay.
Wait a second. 4 to 6 hours of individual testing, and there may be more than one session?
Oh, yes, definitely. If we're doing intelligence testing and processing testing, if some of us have to do achievement testing, sometimes that falls in the resource specialist or special educators. Sometimes it falls on school psychologists. Sometimes we have to do social, emotional, and behavioral assessment. And it takes a while to build rapport with a kid so that they're going to be able to do it. We have kids fill out rating scales about how they think and feel about themselves as learners. So all of these things can take, up to probably around 4 hours would be the average, I would say, at minimum. So once that kid leaves, then we have to score it, analyze it. And here is the big chunk: write it into a legally defensible report, which is about 10 to some upwards of 30 pages long, depending on, who's involved and how many people. We also have to collaborate with all the kids' providers. Do they have a speech therapist? Do they have an occupational therapist? Do they have a private tutor? Do they have a mental health therapist? We got to get their opinions too. And all of this data analysis written into a report takes many, many hours. And, I've been doing this for 20 years and I can't finish a report. I can't churn out a report in less than 6 hours tops. I mean, and I've been doing this a long time and I have really great templates. So then finally, by the time you see that school psychologist at that IEP meeting, she's done upwards of about 20, and in some districts, recent school psych community here in the Bay Area have taken actual hard data on start to finish for one child. How much it takes was 30 hours. So by the time you see the school psychologist in the IEP meeting, she has done, or he has done, a ton of work figuring out how this kid learns best, what's getting in the way, and do they qualify for special education services based on a very stringent criteria of eligibility. And so I think that, when people say, well, test this kid for special education, we think of it in what we understand, you guys understand as teachers, what a test might be. Oh, I'm going to do the Dibbles reading evaluation, right?
Exactly.
And so they don't know that assessment is not just the testing. There is a whole lot of work. And there's also in the IEP, sometimes we have pre-meetings with the parent to go over, because sometimes parents, when they're getting diagnosis, can be like a grieving process. So we're sitting with parents and being like, your child is on the autism spectrum, and processing it with them and explaining what that means all before you see us. So I often say sometimes that school psychologists are like ducks. In that, like, when you see a duck gliding over the water, you're like, oh, they're so smooth. Look at them gliding. But underneath, they're paddling like heck. A lot of work is being done. And so that's your school psychologist. And that's why she looks so crazy, like flying down the hallway and like, hounding you for surveys. Is because she doesn't have this one child. She has a caseload. And some of us run 10, 15 cases at a time. So we not only have to do what I've just described to you, but we also have to balance it with all the other students who are on our caseloads.
So it could be like 30 hours for one student, and you have 10 to 15 students at a time, caseloads.
Yeah. And so that's why school
Mm.
psychologists, like teachers, are overworked,
Hmm.
and PS underutilized, right? If we're spending all of our time doing assessment, we can't help you guys in the classroom with, infusing social emotional learning, which we know can prevent students from and give them access to those great learning skills, right? And so when
Right.
we're working in this one-on-one intensive, there's a definite need for that. There are some students who absolutely need that level of inquiry, but there are some students who would profit from school psychologists being engaged at that tier 1, tier 2 level, which is preventing the challenge from occurring in the first place, or preventing that learning or emotional or behavioral challenge from getting so bad that they need to be referred for special education. And here's the real problem, Angela, is that at a lot of schools, special education is the only game in town for getting
Hmm.
kids extra help. That is the third myth, which is that special education is just extra help. And this kid needs extra help, so let's all turn to special education. I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but it's at schools where we're looking around and being like, how are we going to help this kid? A lot of folks see special education as the only route.
Right. And I think a lot of gen ed teachers haven't been properly trained on, how to provide the proper interventions in the classroom. Getting a kid to qualify for services is not necessarily the end goal in every case. And as you mentioned, you may go through all of this and then realize that they don't qualify.
Right.
So, what do general ed teachers need to understand about providing interventions in the classroom?
So, yes, again, this is that third myth that special education is just extra help. So, and if it's the only game in town for helping students, then that's problematic. School psychologists are bound to this legal criteria that makes the range of who qualifies fairly small. It's really reserved for kids with disabilities that are so severe that that their needs can't be met in general ed, right? And then, of course, there's kids who meet the first criteria, they have a disability, but they don't qualify. And this one's a real head scratcher for people. They're like, wait, they have processing challenges, they have emotional challenges. I would encourage you to sit down with your school psychologist and talk a little bit about the eligibility criteria, because it's a two-part deal. It's not just I have a disability, but it's also I have a disability that's so severe I can't, my needs can't be met in general education. So what I want teachers to think about is that school psychologists are not just gatekeepers and special ed testers. That's an important role of special education assessment. But what I want everyone to reframe and think of us is your consultant and thought partner. Okay, so you guys are all experts in teaching, right? Many of school psychologists have never taught in a classroom, so we don't know that element. And we're experts in supporting kids with learning differences, social emotional, behavioral challenges. Together, we're a powerhouse, right? Like, instead of waiting for some magical solution, outside of your classroom that, if we write this down in an IEP, then suddenly this child's behavior will change. No,
Right.
I wish, but really, an IEP is a protection sometimes for students. It entitles them to accommodation supports they otherwise wouldn't be entitled to, but it's not the magic solution. If you partner with your school psychologist, we can co-create solutions for a particular student. And here's the most interesting thing about consultation with school psychologists. If, Angela, you came to me and you're like, I have a student with ADHD symptoms, and I really want to help them start and finish their work without interrupting their peers, right? If you and I partner together for that particular student around strategies for helping with task initiation, task engagement, right? And knowing the context of your classroom can tell me what's working and what isn't. I, as a school psychologist, can bring my executive functioning knowledge lens to you, and we can co-create a solution for that particular student. Guess what? You have just added to your teacher toolkit a skill set for any other student with that same challenge in the future. So any other kid who comes in your classroom who has challenges starting with, sticking with, and finishing work, now you have beefed up your own skills as a teacher, right?
Mhm.
So it's not just, take this kid out, test him for special education, and, let's see if the IEP team can come up with a great solution. That's a waiting game. And that may be the game, that may be the end goal. But guess what? In the meantime, maybe we could work together. Because let me tell you, I polled school psychologists about, like, what do you guys want teachers to know? And they're like, oh my God, let them know we want to be their thought partners. We want to be consultants with them. We want to be part of our school communities. We want to be on problem solving teams. We want to go to grade level meetings, right? These are our kids, not just special ed kids. These are all of our students. So, we want to partner with you guys. That's one of the core messages that school psychologists have, is think of us as consultants and thought partners before you think of us as special education assessors.
So if I'm a teacher and I have a student in my class this time of year who I'm concerned about, and I think that they may qualify for something, they're really struggling in the class, I have referred them for services, or maybe even if I haven't, um, what are some of those next steps while you're so that it doesn't feel like a waiting game? So it doesn't feel
Mhm.
like I'm washing my hands of this kid. I can't help them. It's beyond me. I'm just sort of waiting and then hoping they qualify for services and they're out of my classroom. What kinds of interventions, what kind of supports, what kind of resources can I tap into now to not feel like we're biding time, but that I'm actually working now, even without an IEP, to make sure the student gets what they need?
Yeah, so let me ask you this. You've been a teacher before, obviously, and you're still a teacher. But when you were in the classroom, how many students would you say, percentage wise, once they were assessed for special education, left your classroom, say for a special day class or a higher level of care?
Not a ton.
Right? I mean,
Not a ton.
a
And not
lot
for
of,
long enough. That was the other thing too. Not for all the subjects they needed help in. Like it was very rarely enough.
yeah. So, first thing is a mindset, which is, this is my student.
Mm.
And even if this student gets resourced, this is still my student. And if you are, at your wit's end with a student, or even if you're not, even if you're just like, I just don't know how to move the needle for them, I would suggest working within the pre-referral systems that exist at your school. Grade level team, problem solving teams. Hey, invite your school psychologist. Maybe she has time to pop in on your grade level team. And, if that student is in multiple grades, for like example, at the middle school, right? And then she can serve as a consultant about what's working in other teachers' classrooms that we can pull from, right, into your classroom. Maybe you need to enlist her support in, chatting with the parents. Maybe there's some strategies the parents have at home that are working. If it's a straight up like learning difference kind of issue with reading and writing and math, your school psychologist can partner with you on, adaptations. How can you help them access the curriculum? If there's a behavioral or emotional layer to it, that's really where your school psychologist has a wealth of knowledge. I think that really, though, we need to pedal back from even just, what do I do with this one kid in this classroom, is what is my relationship like with my school psychologist? If she's a blur in the hallway on the way to IEP meeting, right, it's going to be really hard to grab her and sit down and have a nice problem solving session with her. But that doesn't mean that she or he doesn't want to do that with you. So invite her to grade level team meetings. Invite your school psychologist to RTI or MTSS meetings, which are pre-referral and school-wide interventions. Invite her to leadership team meetings, discipline team meetings. Most school psychologists, even though we are seriously busy individuals, we see the value of working with teachers and families and schools in the intervention and prevention levels. So I would consider, first off, do you know who your school psychologist is? Do you know their name? If you're someone who has one at a school site, all day, every day, congratulations. Like, go, like, write that down in your gratitude journal tonight. Um, but first is honestly is awareness. Who is your school psychologist? What is her caseload like? Right? Does she have time to meet with you and chat about strategies? Does she have time to talk to you about what is special education and what kids, would and wouldn't profit from services, right? It's, that first layer of awareness. And I just have to, shout out School Psychology Awareness Week at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Shameless plug. It's always in November. This year, it's the 12th through 15th. It always falls on that Veterans Day week. So, there's a reason that we have an awareness week and not an appreciation week.
Ah.
Which, right? You are aware we exist is where we're at. Okay. Someday,
Can you
I'm
just
sure
acknowledge my existence first? One day we'll get to appreciation and gratitude, but like, hi, I'm here.
yes, I'm thinking in my brain of this visual that a school psychologist posted of her team at her school, put a note on her door of this owl looking at her like, we're aware of you. Happy School Psych Awareness Week. So get to know your school psychologist. Have a chat. Like, what's your caseload like? What can, we want to help you. We want to partner with you. We want to make your lives easier, not harder, right? We want to be involved in those intervention, prevention, and problem solving teams with you. So get to know your school psychologist if you don't know him or her already. Be aware of her, especially on School Psych Awareness Week, November 12th through 15th. And then if you have a school psychologist who you have a relationship with and you're thinking, wow, it'd be great if we could support her, because if we support her, guess what? We get more support for our students. We get more support for our teachers and our parents and our administrators, right? If you feel like there's a school psychologist who would profit from resources not unlike the ones you offer in the 40-hour teacher work week, which is, streamlining bureaucracy and workflow and productivity and engaging in self-care so you don't burn out, and being a problem-solving member in a school team and a member in a school, then I have free resources, thrivingschoolpsych.com. So be aware of your school psychologist, get to know him or her, let her know that there's support for figuring out ways to do more than just test, IEP, repeat, right? School psychs don't want to be doing that. We love assessment. We're very good at assessment. That's our zone of genius is, unpacking one individual student's learning needs. But let us help you before it gets to that level of challenge.
I love that you're saying that and that that you're emphasizing that actually this just makes things better for everyone. It makes things better for the school psych, it makes things better for teachers and for kids when that partnership is there, because I think it didn't really occur to me to reach out to our school psych because I just felt like it was obvious she was so busy, and like I was so busy, she was so busy. And it's like, I don't want to try to put more work on top of her. But I
Mhm.
think you make such a good point that, that collaboration just makes getting what kids need so much easier for everyone. And I cannot imagine that it feels good to just like come into a school and be disconnected from the teachers, they're disconnected from the students and just like hole up in a room and test and then come out. Like I can imagine the reasons why school psychs are getting into this profession is because you want to be part of that community.
Absolutely. And, we can end on a little story, something to bring it down to kind of what the essence of what I'm talking about is, which is to involve school psychologists in more. Because honestly, if you involve us at prevention and intervention levels, our special education referrals will go down. Now, there's
Hmm.
certainly students who definitely need special education. It's a do not pass go, kind of, we really need to get, students on like the, autism spectrum who are unable to communicate verbally. That would be very challenging for a general education teacher to work with a student of that level of severity, right? But in some of these learning disabilities and attention challenges, there's room for partnership that can serve not only that target student, but all students with that challenge. And then, as a principle of universal design thing, all students in your class and you as a teacher.
Hmm.
So at one middle school where I worked, I was getting, I don't know, 5 or 6 referrals for 8th grade boys for ADHD every year. And I was like, how can they all contract ADHD in the 8th grade? What's going on, right? They were not finishing their work and they had this huge portfolio assignment. And the problem was this portfolio assignment in, April, May, they hadn't done a lot of work all year to the standard. And so then they were having a huge challenge. At some point, I sat down with my team, my principal and the teachers team, the 8th grade team, and I said, what's happening? Why so many referrals how can they all have ADHD, right? And they're like, well, I don't know if they all have ADHD, but they do need challenge. They have challenges in executive functioning, planning and starting with and sticking with tasks, particularly when they're emotionally overloaded with, oh my gosh, I have so much work to do. If I don't do this portfolio, I don't graduate from 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So we sat down and we peeled back the onion of like, okay, wait, instead of me spending 30 clock hours on these 5 students, which would take up my whole time for the rest of the year, and then you wouldn't even get the benefits of that information. They'd be in high school.
Right.
What if I trained up, everyone on executive functioning coaching? And so I got some school psych interns from Berkeley, my alma mater. I trained them on how to support these students in starting with, sticking with, and finishing tasks. And guess what? They all passed their portfolio assignments. None of these kids, by the way, had a history of attention challenges prior to 8th grade. It's very rare to develop ADHD without, in 8th grade. This is a lifelong condition. And there were really no warning signs. So it wasn't like we were ignoring the fact that these students had challenges, but we were asking ourselves, is special education the only way to support them? And it wasn't. And so
Mm-hmm.
these students, they built their skills. The school psychologist interns and I built out a great program. And by the way, I'm no longer at that middle school and they're still doing it because the teacher skills got built up too. So there's a ripple effect of your school psychologist being able to engage in that prevention intervention level that ripples out to the school community at large.
I love the idea of focusing on the prevention and intervention level because it's so much more empowering than just saying like, I can't do this. Let me just refer and then someone else can tell me what to do and hopefully I'll get more help. It comes from such a desperate place for teachers because I think, you know, eh, in a lot of classrooms, close to the majority, if not the majority of kids present with some sort of trauma, executive function issues, attention issues, learning disabilities. They're working below grade level. And it can just feel so overwhelming
Yeah.
to teachers when they don't have a lot of support.
Yeah. And school psychologists want, and I know this because I've worked with hundreds of them across the country in my Thriving School Psychologist Collective, which is my online course and community. They want to work openly and collaboratively to find solutions. We want adults and students alike to thrive in our schools. And we totally believe that like a rising tide, lifts all ships. Is that the phrase? I always get my little phrase
Mm-hmm.
mixed up. But we understand, we empathize with that stress and the limitations and the aggravations in your job. And we want to help prepare you, not only in moments of crisis when it's gotten really challenging, but to set you up for success, to prevent future problems, right? And to really empower your students, so that we really want to be your thought partners. And just also, if I can just do one quick commercial for patience. Oh my goodness,
Mm.
you as a teacher know what it's like if someone's coming to you like, do you have this yet? Do you have that? Do you have, like, you're like, wow, I am just like trying to keep afloat. Just be patient with us. We are doing the best we can under the circumstances and often untenable situations and caseloads. And, that is what it can be a source of frustration on both parts. So, we promise we'll be patient with you when and if you promise to be patient with us, because we're all in it together and we're all in a system that, we all see, is not set up for success sometimes. And we work the best we can in the system we have. And sometimes that means your school psychologist is overworked and underutilized. And so, just be patient with us as we all navigate this together.
Yeah, be patient and tap into them for further resources in the meanwhile so that you're not just waiting because there's probably things you can be doing in your classroom that would benefit all of your students and it could just be just some new strategies in your toolbox that you can get from your school psych who could really make a big difference in how well kids are able to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a big fat commercial for universal design, right? Like
Yep.
the suitcase was invented for people who couldn't bear weight or the elderly, but guess what? The wheelie suitcase, right? But everyone benefits from the wheelie suitcase. There's not a person in an airport who doesn't have that because it helps everybody. And the same
Right.
can be true of principles of behavior and social emotional learning. There are strategies and tools and techniques, and relationships building activities that benefit all of your kids, not just kids with social, emotional, or behavioral learning challenges.
What's something that you wish every teacher understood about the process of identifying kids for special services?
I think that we all have to understand that the system for special education is flawed. School psychologists know that. What is encouraging to me, Angela, is that there is a zeitgeist, if you will, around prevention, intervention, infusing social emotional learning into this base level of what all kids need. We also bear the burden of the system trying to make it work the best we can to benefit the student. We are often have limited resources and particularly authority to make any changes happen on the like special education law front, right? But what we can do is before it even gets to that process, which is needed, necessary, and underfunded, is to what is the most bang for buck for your school psychologist and what does she really enjoy doing? It's collaborating. It's being a consultant and not a gatekeeper.
Hmm.
So get to know your school psychologist and ask, what is the day-to-day life like? Ask the questions that Angela's asked in this podcast. What can we do together to think systemically so that we can prevent students from having to wait until they fail enough to need that high level of support? Because school psychologists want to partner with you. We are all in this, these are all of our students, and we love nothing more than collaborating with you guys.
So let's make that the action item then for everyone listening to this, to get in touch with your school psych, find out how you can partner together, and let them know about your resources because you have an amazing collective of school psychologists where you have 16,000 school psychs in your community, right? Which is like half of the school psychs in this country. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's estimates range between 30 and 40,000 school psychs in the country. And so it just speaks to the need for school psychologists don't have a lot of community at their school sites because they're the only one,
Right.
right? And
Exactly. And
I
that's
think,
the beauty of what you're offering to them as a place to collaborate and share and get resources. And I think that could be so helpful for someone listening to this who is thinking, well, Rebecca sounds amazing, but I don't think my school psych actually has the time or the energy to do anything to help. But if their school psych is in your community, then they have a network of people to bounce ideas off of and figure out how to offer that support, right?
all right. And it's often like, I think sometimes I see this thing floating around Instagram and things, and I always kind of lock them in my brain as truths, which is like sometimes the best PD is another school psychologist, right? Or the
Mm-hmm.
best PD is the teacher down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
We understand, only we understand what we do all day long and ways we can move the needle to support our schools and teachers and students better. So I have thrivingschoolpsych.com as the clearinghouse for people to go. There's 16,000 people in our Facebook group. And then there's a smaller group of those who are in my online course and community. And that's the real deep dive of, okay, let's unpack how to really move myself from being a testing machine to having the freedom to be with students, to be with teachers, to be thought partners and consultants. So guide your school psych to thrivingschoolpsych.com and also be aware of them on November 12th through 15th, right? You'll make their life, I guarantee you, if you like know that it's School Psych Awareness Week, which is actually the acronym is really quite funny, Angela. It's SPA, which like
Ah.
it's not going to the spa. But for me, for whatever reason, this is a total non sequitur, but that's what I'm like. So I'll just be me. I'll be authentic. Every time I see SPAW written out, like I have to caw it like a crow, like spa, spa. Like, so anyway, you can do that or not with your school psychologist. Happy spa. But yeah, that's very random. But you know what? We like to laugh and have fun at the Thriving School Psychologist because, you know, there's a lot of stress in our jobs and we gotta lighten the load, right? We gotta have fun with it.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned your course too, because it's sort of like a 40-hour teacher workweek club that I run for teachers. You're doing something very similar for school psychologists in terms of like the end goal is similar, right? For them to really manage their time and streamline their processes so they can focus on what matters.
Exactly. Yeah, I joke whenever I, like, share out your resources with my school psychologist, Angela, I say, "She's like my, like, teacher spirit animal." Like, I don't know how, like, on different sides of the coast, we both, like, created this thing that, me for school psychologists and you and for teachers, and I think it's because both of us really have that shared vision of all of it. None of us got into this profession, to be doing paperwork or feeling like what we're doing isn't mattering, right?
Yes.
Or that we're just going through the motions. We got into this work to help students. And, when we take care of ourselves, we're better equipped to do that. So that's exactly what the Thriving School Psychologist Collective does and what the 40-hour teacher work week does as well.
I hope my conversation with Rebecca is helpful as you build relationships with your school psychologist. Have a great week. Don't forget to be aware of and appreciate your school psychologist this week. Remember, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be worth it.